Why, why, hello. What? I've never seen cats get so excited over a lens wipe before. Isn't this special? You guys gonna say hello to your friends? Nice ass. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Sarah and I make videos about health and fitness and all of those things, endurance sports. So if you enjoy suffering for fun, you should probably click the buttons down below. Did you know that subscribing to this channel is clinically proven to improve your FTP by 30%? This was research conducted recently, this year, by Kitten and peer-reviewed by Teddy. So it's unimpeachable. This is YouTube science, ladies and gentlemen. Get on that. Hit the buttons. Or hit me. Both are very tempting. I prefer you hit the buttons though. Anyway, today's video starts the series covering the Zwift Academy Road. I did the introductory video a couple of weeks ago. Things kicked off this week, starting August 30th, 2021, and will run through the end of October of 2021, giving you ample time to go through this program and complete the deliverables. Now, I mentioned that I would be covering the workouts so that I can lend some additional preparedness to those of you who are either very new to the program or new to structured training, or maybe those of you who are more veteran, but this program is structured a little bit differently this year, so it might help you to prepare a little bit more adequately for things like fueling, nutrition, rest, recovery, all of that fun stuff. I had not initially intended to do a video on what I'm going to do today, covering the baseline and finish line rides. I had thought initially that it was very personalized and that people were just going to hit those segments in those rides and get a baseline and be able to use those. But what I found when I did my baseline ride, I did both a scouting ride to check out the course, which is unique to these baseline and finish line rides, and then I did a real ride. And I noticed that in both events, that 90% or more of the people in those events are doing the rides wrong. And yes, I can see that they're doing them wrong based on the rider behavior and how they're treating certain areas of the course, and then obviously the segment standings. What people are doing is they are treating these rides like a race. It does not matter who finishes first. There's a bunch of obvious cues in these rides themselves that tells you that this is not a race. There's no standings at all. There's no standings on the right-hand side of the screen because you are not worried about your position. Nobody cares what your position is. I mentioned this in the introductory video, but people who may not have watched that video, who are new to this program, are still doing this wrong. So they are just giving it an all-out effort from beginning to end and saying, hey, I crossed the finish line first. Well, whether you're using these rides for yourself personally to benchmark both beginning and end of your 6 to 8 weeks, however long you take to do these workouts, to see your progress, or you're looking at the pro contract, you're doing the rides wrong. And if you do it wrong, you're shortchanging yourself from both of those elements. And I would say that it's arguably more severe for those of you going for the pro contract because they are not looking at who finished the ride first, okay? They are looking at the segment, which is the purpose of those rides. Now, what I don't know is whether this is a function of people not reading the instructions. Yes, I know that there's several paragraphs involved in the event manager for these baseline and finish line rides. So either people are not reading those or they're not understanding them. Either way, I want this video to help to clarify how to do these rides correctly so that you can use them as a tool for you to evaluate your progress. And if you are going for the pro contract, you're not going to be left out of that vetting process by not following the instructions, okay? So let's kind of talk about how these rides are intended to be completed. So I want you to think of these rides as more of a testing protocol. You know, if those of you out there who may have tried the Sufferfest application, you might be familiar with the 4DP test, which is more than just a standard FTP test, right? It's looking at different systems of power and looking at the execution and trying to give you a baseline to figure out your rider profile. Well, that is what these rides are intended to do. You are not, again, racing toward the finish line. In fact, if you are doing these rides properly, anything that you are doing outside of the segments themselves should be ridden extremely easily so that you hit each segment fresh and prepared with the most amount of energy to expend because you want to get your maximal effort for each of those segments. So to start the ride in a gut-busting sprint or in a time trial to get out in front of everybody, that's wrong. Nobody's looking at that part, and you shouldn't be looking at that part either. So think of it like this. If your baseline and finish line ride were going to be completely contingent on a maximal effort to do like a race, well, think about how many variables there are and how you would not really be able to compare those two rides adequately. You know, first, sleep and nutrition have a huge bearing on it. And yes, of course, that's going to have a bearing on a typical workout as well, but it's exacerbated by the fact that this is an extended all-out effort. You can get away with being a little bit light on sleep compete for something that is maybe short intervals or brief periods of time where you're working hard versus trying to go all out for an hour and a half, right? Those are two different animals. The other element is competition. Depending on the field that you are with, you might go out in the front in the first 10 minutes and put a sizable gap into the rest of the field, and most people are going to conserve energy at this point. You're just going to maintain that gap and hold the minimum effective dose of power necessary to hold those people off. Well, to try to compare that element to something where you're more closely matched with other riders, it's really just comparing apples to oranges, and it's not going to be altogether effective. But if you do the rides properly, where you're taking just segments of time, where you're looking at different power systems and overlaying them on top of one another and making an objective comparison for a similarly executed effort between those two baseline and finish line rides, now all of a sudden you can see if you've made progress over the several weeks that you are engaged in this program. So what you need to do is understand where the segments are and give a maximal effort for just the segments. Everything else in between should be recovery. It should be zone 1, zone 2, spinning out the legs, preparing yourself for the next segment. Full stop. Don't get tied up in what anybody else is doing. Who cares if 50 people pass you? Because you know what? The pro scouts can be looking at these rides and you might finish dead last, but because you executed those segments the best, it's the difference between you being in the running and the first person being completely dropped out of the running. So please, please, please understand that you are not racing the entire ride. If you want that competition, you race the segments. So let's talk about how the segments are broken down. Both the standard and the advanced rides follow the same format. Each of them have 3 key segments that you are there to attack, and they each cover a different energy system. Your sprint or neuromuscular energy system, your VO2 max to low anaerobic energy system, so zone 5, zone 6, and then you have your more aerobic, high aerobic, somewhere around that threshold level range, right? So they set up different segments on the course to test each of those different power zones, and that you're going to execute a maximal effort. So you kind of get an idea by the time you're done with this ride, hey, what's my profile as a rider? Maybe I have a really strong sprint, or maybe my sprint's not so great, but my sustained effort at threshold is very strong. That's what these baseline and finish line rides are meant to evaluate. That leads to the next question. Which ride do you pick? Do you pick the advanced ride or do you pick the standard ride? And there's really 2 things to consider here. First, if you're going for the pro contract, you need to pick the advanced ride. That's written right in the title of the ride, pro contender requirement. So that decision is made for you. However, if you're like most of us and you're just doing the program to get a little bit fitter, to work on some structured training, then it's really going to be a matter of preference and experience. So I'm going to not go through all the nitty-gritty of the courses, but I'm going to give a high-level overview of each of the 2 rides and courses so that you know what you might want to pick. And again, I encourage you to read the directions because it gives much more detailed information that I'm going to give here in this video. This is just to point you in the right direction. So if you choose the advanced level ride, the ride is going to be a little bit longer, so it's 30K versus 25K for the standard rides. Pretty negligible, right? 5K, it might add 10 to 20 minutes depending on how fast you are to your ride. So if you're time constrained, you may want to pick the standard ride. But when all said and done, 25 to 30K is not a huge difference. Where the differences are going to come and where they're important is in how the segments are structured. So again, they both have 3, but they're a little bit different in their style and they're slightly differently ordered. So I'm going to start with the advanced ride, again, 30 kilometers. And the first segment that you're going to run into a few minutes into your ride is going to be a sprint. And this is going to be your standard maximal effort sprint. Think, you're 10 seconds from the finish line, you are giving it everything you have. It's going to take most people between maybe 7-8 seconds all the way up to 15 seconds depending on what your raw wattage is and your skill ability. But this is just basically you're leaving everything on the table. But because you're doing this in the beginning of the ride and you're still fresh, this isn't going to ruin the rest of the ride for you. You're going to be given ample time to recover, which arguably makes it maybe a better time to test that sprint so that you're not completely fatigued. It's trying to maximize on that capability to perform that effort. So give it everything you have, up out of the saddle, full execution of power, everything that you can give it. Yes, most people are going to have less power on the indoor trainer just because of that bike throw, but give it everything that you have on the indoor trainer without, falling over. Following that, you're going to have a decent amount of time to recover. Now, what I want you to keep in mind for both rides is that the segments are typical everyday segments in Zwift. These are not custom segments for these baseline and finish line rides, right? So you're just using the typical segments by name. You can look those up in Zwift Insider or kind of scout those out on the map. But there might be segment starts in between that you'll run over that you don't want to get trapped in. You want to know the course. This is where scouting the course might be helpful, or looking at the map might be helpful. In the advanced ride in particular, you're going to roll over the beginning of the segment for hilly KOM reverse. And don't get caught up in that and start this high level execution of power, because it's a pretty steep kicker. And then you're going to basically drain some of that energy or burn a match, because you're going to turn left before that segment is over. That's not the segment that counts. So you want to try to go up and over that rise as easily as possible. Maybe that means you have to turn your trainer difficulty down or shift into an easier gear, whatever your approach is going to be, but don't burn any matches on that, kind of false segment there. That is not the right one. That is why scouting out, looking at the names of the segments, reading the instructions is going to be very helpful for you. So once you get past that, you're going to go into Titans Grove. And shortly after entering Titans Grove, you'll see the big sign. You're going to hit the Titans Grove reverse KOM. Now this segment is used for both the advanced and the standard ride, so the same elements are going to apply here. But this is intended to touch on your VO2 max and anaerobic level effort. It's going to be anywhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes for most people. And you want to go into the red for this one. You don't want to do this at threshold or at an aerobic level. You really want to give it the maximal effort that you can sustain. If you're not sure, you've never done this particular segment before, count on at least 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. So you're going to give it everything you have for that period of time. The segment starts, you'll see the purple banner at the end. You're actually going to see a 500 kilometer to go banner there as well. So make sure that you're going all the way through that finish line or that arch so that you can get the full execution of power for somewhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes. Now after that, you're going to get a good amount of time to recover. I think it was at least 15 minutes for me if you're recovering an easy race and not trying to race to the next segment. And this is where you're going to run into epic KOM reverse. So this is going to be your sustain level effort. For most people, the fast end is going to be around 18 minutes, and then people on the slower end might be somewhere around 30 minutes. Maybe you're not a great climber or you're a beginner. It might take you more than 30 minutes. But the meaty part of the bell curve, you're probably going to be somewhere in that 20 to 30 minute range. So in that regard, you're going to be focusing on your aerobic system. You're going to be working maybe around your threshold, maybe your sweet spot area, depending on how well developed your power zones are. So count on anywhere between 85 and 105% of your FTP. There might be periods of time where things get a little bit steeper. You need to execute a little bit more power to maintain speed. In much the same way, there might be flatter sections where you can get a little bit of recovery for a few seconds. But the idea is over the course of that time, you're working mostly aerobically, and you're trying to stay as close to a steady state as possible with the undulations in terrain. And then you can go ahead and just kind of recover. There is a finish line that's just kind of an invented finish line on the backside of the climb. So it's not a typical arch that you see. You're going to finish, right after another small rise in the road. If you want to take some extra kilometers on the way down and go all the way down to the epic KOM on the front side or the long side, you can go ahead and do that. But not too long after you finish that arch, you're going to finish the ride. For the standard ride, it's structured slightly differently, and you are going to start with that anaerobic or VO2 max level effort on the Titans Grove reverse KOM. So same thing applies, right? 30 seconds to 3 minutes. Count on at least 3 minutes if you haven't done it before. So try to execute as much power as humanly possible between that 105 to 120% of your FTP, somewhere in that range. And then you're going to be given a decent amount of time to recover. Then you're going to go into a sprint. Now this one's different than the advanced ride. It might not be as appealing to some of you with that really powerful sprint. This is a long sprint. So if you're familiar with racing at all, this is more of a lead out level effort. This is about 400 meters long and is going to take 20 seconds or more for many of you. Now I know that 20 seconds doesn't seem like a lot of time, but when you're doing a maximal sprint, 20 seconds may as well be an eternity. The idea is not to hit that sprint at 100% of your total effort and then just continue to drop off power until your legs basically come to a halt. You want to address this like a lead out. So ideally, you're going to hit at a pretty high level of your FTP and continue to accelerate and increase your power until you peak right before the finish line. This helps to give you a higher average of power over the course of the 20 seconds rather than trying to hedge your bets with peaks and valleys there. So just be prepared for that to be a longer sprint than most sprints. It's not as long as some of the ones that you'll find in Tempest Fugit, but just be aware that it is a 20-second effort, might be partially seated or fully seated, so it's a little bit different than a maximal sprint. Then you'll be given a decent amount of recovery and you're going to go into your sustained effort, which is going to be a bit shorter than the advanced ride. So if you're not a very good climber, this might be the right ride for you. Now, I argue the choice on this particular segment, given that for some of you, you will have a faster time, which might put you still in that VO2 max zone if you have a good developed VO2 max level power system, because you could finish that climb in 7 minutes. A lot of people can do a VO2 max level effort for 6 to 8 minutes. It is really intended to capture more of that aerobic zone, more of that threshold level, tickling around your threshold, 100%, 105%. And that would be what I would target for most of you, but hell, have at it if you have a better developed VO2 max and you can hold that level of power for a longer period of time and you can get a faster time up that climb. But the idea for any of those rides to go through those segments with the maximal level of power, and hopefully this video will have given you some benchmarks for how long you can expect to sustain that effort. So if you have an idea in your head of what your power zones could be like and how hard you can push for how long, that's a good baseline to have in your head. You might have zero idea how long you can hold different levels of power. That's okay. That's kind of the purpose of this ride a little bit here, especially if you're touching on structured training for the first time. It's just to get you a benchmark, right? But you can use some of these ideas that I'm giving you to do the best that you can. Don't be afraid to fail. Push as hard as you can for as long as you can. And if you have to come back and revisit, that you can. But at least you know. You know that, for 6 of the 8 minutes that you needed for, the Volcano KOM, that you did very well and then you completely fell apart. That's information that you can actually use rather than just trying to ride aimlessly to finish as well as you can in the group, right? Again, I'm going to stress this several times here. Nobody cares what your placement is, not even the pro scouts. They're not looking at it. If you read the directions for the events, it specifically says easy spin between those segments, okay? So if you take nothing else away from this video, understand that it doesn't matter where you finish in the pack, it matters where you finish for the segment. Race for those segments. Try to get yourself on top of the leaderboard for those segments. Try to finish first, try to finish fifth. Whatever is an appropriate goal for you, go for those goals and compare yourself to others on the day to push yourself up the leaderboard for the segments and not for the ride. Please do the rides appropriately. Now, I want to close off with just giving you some just general advice as to how to pursue these rides. First, let's talk about preparedness. These particular routes are unique to these rides. I would argue that the markings for the segments are kind of not the best. Sometimes you get a warning, sometimes you don't. We could argue whether or not Zwift could have done better or should have done better. It is what it is. So I would almost recommend doing what I did and just picking an event and scouting it out maybe as a recovery ride. Just ride through it and understand what things look like. If you're confused, go back to the instructions and read those things so that you can prepare accordingly. Because if you want to master and hit those segments as strong as you can, you want to be prepared for it. And because the course is unique, sometimes it's not as effective to look at the map. If you're familiar with the segments by name, you can probably be pretty well prepared. But again, some of those weird turns that it takes for a custom route might throw you off guard. So it might help if you can do a scouting ride. If not, at least review the map. The next thing might seem obvious, but come in prepared in terms of recovery and nutrition, right? If you can get yourself the best night's sleep possible and come in properly fueled and nourished. I know a lot of people like to do fasted rides to work on that ability to use fat burning and not be as reliant on sugar, but this ride, as well as a number of the workouts, we are focused on performance, not on enhancing autophagy, not on working on that fat burning zone. The point of high level execution of power is for performance. So fuel the rides accordingly. I would recommend not doing these fasted. You certainly can, but you're going to be diminishing your performance. You are working in those sugar burning zones. You're not going to work zone 4, 5, 6, 7 in your fat burning zones. So fasting or not, it doesn't matter. You need to come into these rides fueled if you want the highest execution of power. Now, for the baseline ride and finish line ride specifically, I would recommend one of a couple of approaches. Either you come in topped up and very well fueled, you do your first couple of efforts or segments, and then maybe you top up mid-ride with something like a gel, some blocks, a bar. You could do it with liquid nutrition, but if you're not as diligent with drinking as you go, you might screw up the timing there. So try to find something, some quick delivery sugar source somewhere mid-ride. Or if you didn't come to the ride fueled, that's okay too. Maybe you take something like a gel at the beginning of the ride and then in the middle of the ride. Because what's going to happen is as you work through those first two segments, you're going to start to drain the tank a little bit. And then for that sustained effort you need to do at the end, you might be a little bit short on those sugar and glycogen stores. So you want to top those up mid-ride if you want the maximal level of performance. You know, some of these rides you may not have to take fuel in ride, but understand the difference between fasted and then no in-ride nutrition. If you come into a workout fueled that might be 45 minutes long, you can certainly do it without taking on exogenous fuel during the ride itself. If you're topped up, it might carry you through. Some of them might be more intelligent to take nutrition in the middle of the ride. It really depends. I'll try to share that as we go, but I would not recommend going into this ride or any of these workouts completely fasted, like overnight and doing an early morning workout. This ride in particular, because of its length though, I do recommend in-ride nutrition. The low end of these rides, especially if you're doing them properly and recovering appropriately, the low end, probably 45 to 50 minutes for the standard ride. Low end for the advanced ride, probably about an hour, and then might be between that and an hour and 30, 2 hours. So clearly you're going to have a decent amount of time in the bike with your basal metabolic rate and your caloric burn from the workout itself. Take on some extra sugars to maximize on that performance. But that's pretty much it. I hope that you found the preparation for the rides themselves, as well as some of the tips I've given, helpful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know down below. I'll do my best to answer those questions down there. Please take on this program for the best, really, execution for you. That's the best thing you can take away from this video. This is supposed to be a tool, a training program. So do everything you can to get the most out of it. Don't just check the boxes here. Get everything that you can out of these rides and these workouts. If you do them correctly, if you follow these instructions, I guarantee you, you're going to be a lot happier, 4, 6, 8 weeks from now, when not only you got the shiny bike, but you got some extra fitness to go with it. So thank you guys so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hit that thumbs up button if you got any value out of this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.